is silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape.
Welcome back, horror aficionados, to another spine-tingling episode of Real Talk Horror Edition. I'm your host, Josh, here to guide you through the eerie corridors of psychological horror, where paranoia reigns supreme, and reality is just a suggestion. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the dark side of cinema. This season, we're exploring the themes of paranoia and the unknown, highlighting films that make us question what's real and what's imagined, often leaving us feeling as unmoored as the characters themselves. Today's film, Gothika, the fifth entry in part 2 of our 3-part series, where each part has 7 films. This one, directed by Mathieu Kassovitz. The movie takes us into the shadowy world where psychological instability collides with supernatural terror. With its blend of ghostly apparitions, sinister secrets, and a protagonist who can't trust her own mind, Gothika embodies the kind of chaotic energy that psychological horror fans crave, even if it does stumble along the way. Now, let's talk about what makes this film a fascinating, if flawed, entry into the genre. It's one of those movies that swings for the fences with big ideas about trauma, guilt, and justice. Sometimes it hits a solid home run. Other times it's more of a wild pitch. But hey, that's part of the fun, right? If you're the kind of horror fan who enjoys dissecting a film's imperfections as much as its strengths, well then, maybe you're in for a treat. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's give credit where it's due. Gothika, as I mentioned, directed by Mathieu Kassovitz, a filmmaker who made waves with La Haine, a gritty, socially charged drama that couldn't be more different from today's supernatural thriller. While Kassovitz has proven himself as a skilled director, his work on Gothika feels like a departure from his usual style, leaning heavily into Hollywood horror tropes. The screenplay comes from Sebastian Gutierrez, who has a knack for blending psychological intrigue with the surreal. Gutierrez has a distinct voice, though here it feels like he's juggling too many ideas at once, resulting in a narrative that's as fragmented as our protagonist's psyche. On paper, this cast is a dream team. Halle Berry as the tormented Dr. Miranda Gray, Robert Downey Jr. as her skeptical colleague, and Penélope Cruz as a fellow inmate with secrets of her own. With talent like this, you'd expect the ultimate in psychological tension. But as we'll later explore, the execution doesn't always live up to the potential. Real quick, let's set the stage. We have Dr. Miranda Gray, a brilliant psychiatrist working at a high-security penitentiary. Her life takes a horrifying turn when she wakes up as a patient in her own institution, accused of murdering her husband. She has no memory of the crime, only fragmented visions of a mysterious young girl who may or may not be a ghost. As Miranda grapples with her crumbling reality, she's thrust into a conspiracy that forces her to question everything: her memories, her sanity, and the trustworthiness of those around her. The film weaves themes of isolation, betrayal, and the supernatural into a tangled web of suspense. It's the kind of story that promises to keep you guessing, but often leaves you scratching your head instead. Now, my initial thoughts. When I first saw the trailer for Gothika, I was intrigued. A psychological thriller with supernatural elements, a powerhouse cast, Halle Berry fresh off her Oscar win, Robert Downey Jr. on the way up, and who doesn't love Penélope Cruz? It was all sign me up. But by the time the credits rolled, I found myself grappling with a mix of admiration and frustration. There are moments when Gothika delivers genuine chills, creepy visuals, some unsettling twists, and a brooding atmosphere that really pulls you in. But for every strength, there's a stumble. The plot often feels like it's trying to juggle too many genres at once, and the result is a film that's both ambitious and uneven. Still, there's something undeniably entertaining about Gothika, whether it's the over-the-top melodrama, the occasional brilliance of its scares, or the sheer audacity of its storytelling. It's a movie that'll stick with you, for better or worse. So let's dive deeper into the psychological roller coaster and see what makes it tick. One of the reasons Gothika feels so maddeningly uneven is that it sets up fascinating psychological themes, but rarely delivers on their potential. Let's break down its approach to these elements. At its heart, Gothika thrives, or tries to thrive, on the unsettling notion of role reversal. Miranda Gray starts as the competent, level-headed psychiatrist, the kind of person whose job is to untangle other people's psychological knots. But when she wakes up accused of a heinous crime that she doesn't remember committing, the tables turn dramatically. Suddenly, she's no longer the doctor, but the patient, gaslit by her own memories, or lack thereof, and an institutional system that seems designed to strip her of agency. This is an intriguing premise. Who hasn't felt the creeping fear of losing control, of being misinterpreted or disbelieved? Unfortunately, Gothika doesn't take full advantage of this setup. The manipulation feels more surface level than psychological, relying heavily on spooky aesthetics and jump scares rather than the deeper, more unsettling layers of gaslighting. For example, rather than exploring Miranda's internal battle within her own mind, the film often distracts us with ghostly apparitions and cryptic messages scrawled in blood. These moments are shocking, but they lack the emotional weight that could have made the manipulation truly haunting. If Gothika does anything well, it's in blurring the lines between perception and reality, at least in the first half of the film. Miranda's visions are haunting, filled with shadowy figures and cryptic warnings, making us question whether she's unraveling mentally or seeing something supernatural. This theme is a staple of psychological horror, and when done right, it leaves us questioning our own understanding of the narrative. But here, the film seems unsure of how to walk that fine line. It raises questions. Are these events real? Is Miranda's guilt manifesting as hallucinations? But then undermines the ambiguity with clunky exposition. The ghostly elements feel more like a plot convenience than a deliberate tool for psychological tension. For instance, when Miranda's visions start leading her to clues about a sinister conspiracy, the mystery shifts from her mental state to a standard whodunit. The focus on unraveling the external plot dilutes what could have been a powerful exploration of her internal struggle. When it comes to psychological horror, the protagonist's journey is everything. In Gothika, we follow Miranda's descent from composed professional to frantic inmate, but the transformation feels more perfunctory than profound. Miranda starts the film as a calm and capable psychiatrist, and within minutes, she's thrust into a waking nightmare. While Halle Berry delivers a committed performance, the script doesn't give her the nuance she deserves. There's little time spent exploring how Miranda processes her sudden role reversal or her growing suspicion that her mind and her memories are betraying her. Instead, the film rushes her through a series of plot points, robbing her arc of emotional depth. Supporting characters fare even worse. Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Pete, seems to exist solely to offer lukewarm moral support or play the skeptic. Penélope Cruz, as Chloe, has a backstory that's tragically underexplored, despite its potential to add layers to the narrative. These characters feel less like people and more like chess pieces, moved around to serve the plot. One of the film's strongest elements is its use of the unknown to generate fear, again in the beginning. The ghostly figure of the young girl, the mysterious not alone messages, and the stark isolation of Miranda's environment all create a great sense of unease. But here's the rub. Gothika sets up these moments of eerie ambiguity only to undercut them with overly explicit explanations. By the time we learn the full story, the fear of the unknown has been replaced by a fear of predictable storytelling. What starts as an intriguing psychological puzzle devolves into a by-the-numbers thriller. The Ghost Girl, for example, she initially represents an unsettling enigma, an embodiment of Miranda's fractured psyche, or a harbinger of something darker. But as her purpose becomes clearer, she shifts from a symbol of dread to a plot device, guiding Miranda through the narrative like a spectral GPS. This transition strips the story of its psychological tension, turning what could have been a haunting exploration of fear into a procedural mystery with supernatural window dressing. Gothika flirts with fascinating ideas, gaslighting, blurred realities, fear of losing control, but it doesn't fully commit to any of them. Instead, it spreads itself too thin, dabbling in psychological horror, supernatural thriller, and murder mystery without mastering any of them. The result is a film less like a deep dive into the human psyche and more like a shallow wade through a murky swamp of undercooked ideas. That said, it's not without its moments. The eerie atmosphere and occasional flashes of brilliance hint at what Gothika could have been if it had leaned harder into the psychological elements. It's a film that aims high but ultimately settles for mediocrity, offering just enough intrigue to keep you watching, but not enough to leave a lasting impression. The atmosphere and tone of Gothika are undeniably some of its strongest assets, working overtime to create an unsettling mood that often outshines the film's muddled narrative. Let's break it down into the visual, auditory, and environmental elements that contribute to this eerie experience. Director Mathieu Kassovitz leans heavily into a muted color palette, dominated by blues, grays, and washed-out whites. This stark, desaturated aesthetic immediately sets a tone of cold detachment and isolation, aligning perfectly with Miranda's journey from clinical control to chaos. The use of shadows is particularly striking. Characters often appear partially obscured or silhouetted, mirroring the fragmented nature of Miranda's psyche. Reflections also play a significant role, whether it's Miranda catching glimpses of ghostly figures in glass surfaces or her own distorted image staring back at her. These visual motifs subtly reinforce the film's themes of identity and fractured reality. Kassovitz also employs tight, claustrophobic framing to emphasize the oppressive nature of the penitentiary setting. The camera often lingers uncomfortably close to characters, trapping them, and by extension us, in the fear and confusion. While the film occasionally indulges in some cliched horror visuals, such as flickering lights and sudden shadows, these moments are executed with enough flair to still be effective. If the visuals set the stage, John Ottman's score ensures that every corner of the film is drenched in dread. The music is a blend of moody, atmospheric tones and sharp, jarring crescendos that punctuate the jump scares. At its best, it heightens the psychological tension, pulling us deeper into Miranda's unraveling world. At its worst, it does veer into melodrama, almost as if the music is trying to compensate for the script's shortcomings. What really stands out, though, is the use of ambient sound. The whispers, faint echoes, and the ever-present hum of fluorescent lights work together to create an auditory sense of unease. Footsteps in empty hallways and the clang of metal doors emphasize the stark loneliness of the penitentiary setting. There's an unpredictability to the soundscape. Moments of silence suddenly broken by an unsettling noise that mirrors Miranda's erratic mental state. While some might argue that the sound design relies too heavily on horror tropes, there's no denying its effectiveness in making us feel just a little more on edge. even if the scares themselves don't always land. The sound often makes you believe they might. The Penitentiary is a brilliant choice for a psychological horror film, offering a naturally oppressive and unsettling environment. The stark, sterile hallways and cold fluorescent lighting create a sense of dehumanization, as if the building itself is working to strip Miranda and us in the audience of any comfort or control. However, while the setting is effective, it feels underutilized. The film hints at the potential for the penitentiary to become a character like the Overlook Hotel, but it never fully commits. For instance, the facility's design could have been used to disorient Miranda, with maze-like corridors or recurring visual landmarks, creating a sense of spatial confusion. Instead, it serves more as a generic backdrop, functional but unremarkable. The small glimpses of the outside world, such as the foggy, rain-drenched landscape surrounding the prison, add to the film's overall atmosphere of isolation. Yet these moments are fleeting, leaving us craving a more immersive exploration of the setting's psychological implications. Where Gothika excels is in moments where the visuals, sound, and setting converge to create a visceral sense of unease. Each standout scene involves Miranda walking through the penitentiary's darkened hallways, the sound of her own breathing competing with the distant echoes of whispers. The camera follows her at an almost predatory distance, amplifying her vulnerability. These moments, while effective, are frustratingly rare. The film only leans too heavily on conventional horror moments, like sudden apparitions and loud musical stingers, when it could have relied more on the subtler psychological tension created by the atmosphere. In many ways, the atmosphere of Gothika is a tantalizing glimpse of what the film could have been. The muted visuals, eerie sound design, and oppressive setting all work together to create a sense of dread, even as the plot falters. It's a shame, then, that these elements often feel like they're fighting against the narrative, rather than enhancing it. If Gothika had leaned harder into its atmospheric strengths, using the penitentiary as a more active, oppressive force, or allowing the soundscape to play a larger role in blurring the lines between reality and hallucinations, it might have been a standout in psychological horror. As it stands, the atmosphere and tone are compelling, but undercut by the film's uneven execution. Characters are the backbone of any psychological thriller, and in Gothika, they're a mixed bag of potential and missed opportunities. While the film undeniably boasts a talented cast, the characters themselves often feel more like pieces on a chessboard, moved to serve the plot, rather than fully fleshed out individuals with compelling arcs. Dr. Miranda Gray, as we mentioned, played by Halle Berry, is the anchor of the story, and her journey from composed professional to a frantic inmate is meant to drive the narrative. At the outset, Miranda is presented as a confident and empathetic psychiatrist, someone who believes in the power of logic and rationality to solve even the most unsettling mysteries of the human mind. This makes her sudden descent into chaos all the more jarring, but not necessarily in a good way. The film positions Miranda's unraveling as a central theme, yet it skims the surface of her psychological torment rather than diving deep. We see her struggle to reconcile her memories with the terrifying events unfolding around her, but her transformation feels abrupt, as though large chunks of her internal journey were left on the cutting room floor. Instead of gradual deterioration, Miranda seems to jump from composed to hysterical within moments, leaving the audience disconnected from her plight. For instance, her visuals and hallucinations are critical to the story, but the film uses them more as plot devices than as windows into her psyche. These experiences could have been a rich source of tension, allowing us to question Miranda's reliability as a narrator and grapple with the ambiguity of her reality. Unfortunately, the execution feels superficial, leaning on generic horror tropes rather than exploring the nuanced interplay of fear, guilt, and confusion that could have made her arc truly compelling. The film's antagonist, a seemingly ordinary person hiding a dark, monstrous secret, is revealed late in the story. This human monster trope can be incredibly effective in psychological horror, but Gothika mishandles it by withholding too much information for too long. While the antagonist's motivations are undoubtedly chilling, the lack of build-up robs the reveal of its intended impact. A well-crafted villain should cast a shadow over the entire narrative. Their presence felt even before their identity is revealed. In Gothika, the antagonist is more of a plot twist than an active, looming threat. Their actions and motivations are explained hastily in the final act, leaving little time for the audience to process the true horror of their deeds or understand their psychology. This lack of development makes the reveal feel cheap, more like a gotcha moment than a climactic revelation. That said, the concept of the antagonist hiding in plain sight is an effective commentary on the dangers of unchecked power and trust misplaced in authority figures. With more attention to detail, a stronger narrative foundation, the villain could have been a truly unforgettable figure. Penélope Cruz's character, Chloe, is one of the film's few highlights in terms of supporting roles. Chloe, a fellow inmate, is haunted by her own demons, and Cruz brings a real sense of unease to the role. Her erratic behavior and cryptic warnings add additional layers of tension, making her interactions with Miranda some of the most compelling moments. However, like much of Gothika, Chloe's potential is left largely untapped. She serves primarily as a plot catalyst, her tragic backstory and psychological trauma reduced to breadcrumbs that Miranda follows to uncover the larger conspiracy. Chloe's character could have been a powerful mirror to Miranda, a reminder of what happens when the mind breaks under the weight of unspeakable horrors. Instead, she is sidelined, her arc incomplete, and her presence in the story underwhelming. Robert Downey Jr. and the great Charles S. Dutton play Miranda's colleague and husband, respectively, and are similarly underutilized. Both characters could have added complexity to the story, either as sources of support or suspicion. Instead, they feel more like placeholders, their roles defined by how they serve Miranda's journey, rather than by their own agency or depth. The overarching issue with Gothika's characters is their lack of agency. Miranda reacts to events rather than driving the narrative. The supporting cast exists to either move her along or provide convenient exposition. This passive approach undermines the psychological depth the film desperately needs. If the script had devoted more time to exploring Miranda's internal struggles, delving into the antagonist's motivations, or fleshing out the supporting cast, it could have elevated Gothika from a standard thriller to a truly gripping character study. The building blocks are there: a strong lead, a chilling premise, and a talented ensemble, but they're never fully assembled into a cohesive whole. So while Gothika has moments of brilliance in its performances and character concepts, the execution leaves much to be desired. Miranda's psychological journey is engaging on the surface, but lacks depth to resonate emotionally. The antagonist is chilling in theory, but fails to leave a lasting impression due to a lack of narrative presence, and the supporting characters, though intriguing, are little more than plot devices. In the end, Gothika misses an opportunity to create a rich tapestry of interconnected characters whose fears, flaws, and motivations could have amplified the film's psychological tension. Instead, we're left with glimpses of greatness, obscured by missed opportunities. Symbolism and subtext are the lifeblood of psychological horror, providing layers of meaning that enrich the narrative and linger in our minds. In Gothika, these elements exist in the form of visual motifs and thematic undertones, but often they feel underdeveloped, teasing depth without committing to it. Let's break down the film's use of symbolism and subtext, where it succeeds and where it falls short. Gothika leans heavily on recurring imagery to convey its themes, with water and mirrors standing out as central visual metaphors. Throughout the film, water is used to symbolize the fluidity of perception and the murky divide between reality and illusion. From rain-soaked settings to scenes of drowning, water is ever present, reflecting Miranda's struggle to navigate the storm of her fractured reality. It also ties into the idea of cleansing, both literal and metaphorical, suggesting that Miranda must confront her demons to emerge whole. However, while visually striking, the film doesn't explore these implications in depth, leaving the motif as more of an aesthetic choice than a meaningful narrative thread. The use of mirrors as a symbol of duality and self-perception is another recurring theme. Miranda's reflection often appears distorted or fragmented, underscoring her deteriorating sense of self and her inability to trust her own mind. Mirrors serve as a gateway between the natural and supernatural, a portal to the truths Miranda is forced to confront. But as with the water, the symbolism remains surface level. The potential to explore how mirrors reflect not just appearances, but hidden truths and inner fears is left largely unrealized. Miranda's visions of the ghostly girl and cryptic messages could be interpreted as external manifestations of her internal struggles, guilt, trauma, and repressed memories. This type of psychological symbolism is common in psychological horror, allowing the supernatural to serve as a metaphor for the protagonist's mental state. In Gothika, however, this avenue is abandoned in favor of a more straightforward, supernatural explanation. Instead of using Miranda's experiences to dive into her psyche or explore themes of the repressed guilt, the film opts to tie the visions directly to the antagonist's crimes. While this approach provides clarity for the plot, it sacrifices the ambiguity and depth that could have made the story compelling. Miranda's visions could have been an opportunity to blur the lines between reality and delusion, forcing us to question whether we're witnessing supernatural events or a mind unraveling under the weight of trauma. Now, beneath its supernatural veneer, Gothika hints at a commentary on abuse and the silencing of victims, particularly through the experiences of Chloe and the ghostly girl. The film touches on the devastating effects of unchecked power and the systemic failures that allow abusers to hide in plain sight. This theme could have provided a powerful undercurrent to the story, grounding its supernatural elements in real-world horrors. Unfortunately, this commentary is overshadowed by the film's disjointed narrative and over-reliance on horror cliches. The treatment of abuse victims in Gothika feels more like a plot device than a genuine exploration of their struggles. For example, Chloe's haunting monologues about her past suggest a deeper narrative about systemic neglect and the scars left by trauma. But these threads are left dangling, Similarly, the ghost girl's tragic story is revealed in a rushed and overly simplistic manner, reducing her to just a trope rather than a fully realized symbol of justice or retribution. The potential for Gothika to engage in meaningful social commentary is there, but it's buried under a need to prioritize jump scares and plot twists over substance. A more nuanced approach could have elevated the film, using its supernatural elements as a lens to examine the real-world horrors of abuse, guilt, and silence. One of the most significant missed opportunities lies in the lack of cohesion between the film's visual motifs and its narrative. The recurring imagery of water and mirrors, while visually engaging, feels disconnected from the story's deeper themes. Similarly, the potential for psychological symbolism is undercut by the film's insistence on providing concrete explanations for its supernatural elements. Had the filmmakers chosen to lean into ambiguity, using the visuals and symbolism to create a more layered and introspective narrative, the result could have been a haunting exploration of the human psyche and the blurred lines between perception and reality. Gothika flirts with profound ideas, but struggles to integrate them into its narrative effectively. The visual metaphors of water and mirrors, the potential for psychological symbolism, and the faint traces of social commentary are all compelling in theory, but lack the development needed to resonate deeply. Ultimately, the film's symbolism and subtext are like faint whispers in the dark, intriguing but incomplete, leaving us yearning for more depth and cohesion. With greater focus and a willingness to embrace ambiguity, Gothika could have transformed its haunting imagery and thematic hints into a truly thought-provoking experience. In psychological horror, pacing and plot structure are as crucial as the scares themselves, setting the rhythm for tension and allowing twists to land with impact. Unfortunately, Gothika struggles in this department, delivering an experience that feels both rushed and dragged out, with moments that fail to capitalize on their potential. Let's dissect how these elements play out or fall short in the film. The pacing of Gothika is an exercise in contradiction. It oscillates between moments of sluggish buildup and abrupt narrative leaps, creating an uneven rhythm that makes it difficult for the audience to stay engaged. Early scenes attempt to establish a foreboding atmosphere, particularly as Miranda transitions from psychiatrist to inmate. These moments should have been fertile ground for tension and character development, but they feel underwhelming. The film spends too much time on repetitive sequences, like Miranda wandering the halls of the penitentiary or being haunted by the ghost girl, without adding layers to the mystery or deepening the psychological stakes. In stark contrast, major plot developments, including key revelations about the antagonist and the overarching conspiracy, are delivered in a rapid-fire manner. These moments, which should feel monumental, instead come across as rushed, leaving little time for us to absorb their emotional or narrative weight. The transitions between these extremes disrupt the film's flow, making it feel overlong despite its modest runtime. The result is a film that neither fully embraces the slow burn suspense required to create psychological dread, nor delivers the relentless momentum of a fast-paced thriller. Twists are the backbone of psychological horror, meant to upend audience expectations and deepen the narrative complexity. In Gothika, however, the twists are disappointingly predictable, robbing the story of its intended psychological impact. From the moment Miranda begins experiencing supernatural phenomena, it's clear that these events are tied to a larger conspiracy. The breadcrumbs leading to the antagonist are so obvious that the eventual reveal feels more like a confirmation than a revelation. This lack of surprise diminishes the tension, as we are always a step ahead of the narrative. And the film flirts with complex possibilities. Are Miranda's visions a manifestation of trauma? Or is she genuinely experiencing the supernatural? Could her unraveling mental state suggest an unreliable narrator? Unfortunately, these intriguing questions are sidelined in favor of a straightforward and overly convenient resolution. The twists could have been an opportunity to explore themes of guilt, memory, and perception, but they instead settle for superficial shocks. The conclusion of Gothika is a prime example of playing it safe in a genre that thrives on risk and ambiguity. The film ties up its narrative threads neatly, ensuring that every question is answered and every plotline resolved. While this may provide a sense of closure, it feels out of place in psychological horror, where ambiguity enhances the story's lingering impact. A more open-ended conclusion, leaving the audience questioning Miranda's sanity or the true nature of the events, would have been far more fitting. By the time the credits roll, the film feels like it has spoon-fed its audience, leaving little room for interpretation or debate. The antagonist's downfall, while satisfying on a surface level, lacks the emotional or thematic resonance that could have elevated the story. Instead of leaving us haunted by what we've just witnessed, the ending feels more like a checklist being completed. To improve its pacing and plot structure, Gothika could have leaned into its psychological elements and embraced the power of ambiguity. Imagine a version of the film where the line between reality and delusion is never fully clarified, forcing us to grapple with our own interpretations. Twists could have been seeded more subtly, allowing for genuine shock when they're revealed. And the ending could have left us with haunting questions rather than tidy answers. Gothika had the potential to be a standout in psychological horror, but its uneven pacing and predictable twists prevent it from reaching those heights. By failing to commit to either a slow burn suspense or a fast-paced thrill ride, the film ends up feeling caught in limbo. Its twists and turns, while serviceable, lack the ingenuity to leave a lasting impression. Ultimately, the film's tidy ending betrays its genre's greatest strength: the ability to leave us unsettled and questioning long after the credits roll. If Gothika had been willing to embrace its darker, more ambiguous potential, it could have been a far more memorable entry in the psychological horror canon. When assessing the impact and legacy of a psychological horror film, it's important to look at how it shapes the genre, how it's received by audiences and critics, and whether it manages to carve out a lasting place in the cinematic landscape. Gothika, with its mix of psychological thrills and supernatural elements, doesn't quite hit the mark when it comes to genre-defining moments. However, it's far from forgettable, and its legacy has a certain niche quality that resonates with those who appreciate its campier side. Let's dive into how Gothika fits within the broader context of psychological horror and its place in film history. When we look at the broader genre of psychological horror, certain films break new ground, challenging our expectations, redefining tropes, or introducing groundbreaking techniques. Unfortunately, that's not Gothika. The film relies on established psychological horror conventions, gaslighting, unreliable narration, and supernatural hauntings, without ever adding anything revolutionary to the conversation. The genre has seen far more complex explorations of mental illness, grief, and perception versus reality, with films like The Sixth Sense or Black Swan, using similar themes but with much more depth and sophistication. Gothika, by contrast, plays it safe, leaning on the emotional star power of its cast, rather than reinventing the wheel. Where Gothika excels, though, is as an entry point for those unfamiliar with psychological horror. Its relatively easy to follow narrative, spooky atmosphere, and combination of supernatural elements make it a more accessible film for a casual audience. It doesn't require deep analysis to understand or appreciate, and for genre newcomers, it may serve as a soft introduction before they move on to more complex, thought-provoking films. Despite its potential to introduce new ideas, Gothika never quite capitalizes on its premise. Instead of evolving the genre or pushing boundaries, it keeps the psychological elements in shallow waters, never diving into those murky depths where the truly unsettling films reside. As a result, it remains a footnote rather than a standout in the realm of psychological horror. When Gothika was released, critics were, for the most part, underwhelmed. The film's initial reception wasn't one of acclaim, but rather indifference, with many pointing out its lack of depth and reliance on gimmicks rather than terror. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a pretty low approval rating, hovering around 12 to 15% from critics, reflecting a disappointment of that film's promised compelling psychological experience, but the fact that it delivered something far more superficial. Critics, though, praised Halle Berry's performance, but were quick to note how the plot undermined her potential, leaving the film feeling unremarkable despite its star power. Some saw it as a missed opportunity, an exercise in style over substance. Audience reception is more polarized. There are those who appreciate the film for its atmospheric qualities and the lingering sense of dread, even if the narrative doesn't hold up. They find enjoyment in the superficial elements, the ghostly presence, the haunting visuals, and the mood the film manages to create. On the other hand, a significant portion of viewers found Gothika forgettable, dismissing it as another generic thriller, without the staying power to be truly memorable. It's not a film that sparks much debate or deep conversation post-viewing. It's just sort of there. Again, with Rotten Tomatoes, the film's approval rating hovers around 45% from general audiences. Despite its tepid reception from both critics and audiences, Gothika has managed to carve out a niche for itself in the years since its release, earning a kind of guilty pleasure status. One of the main reasons Gothika has found its place in cult cinema is its embrace of genuinely campy elements. While the film attempts to explore serious psychological themes, it occasionally veers into melodrama and absurdity, which some viewers find unintentionally charming. There's a certain thrill in watching a high-budget, A-list cast deal with a script that teeters on the edge of absurdity, creating a viewing experience that can be simultaneously entertaining and eye-roll inducing. It's the kind of film that fans love to revisit for its over-the-top moments. Whether it's Berry's wide-eyed descent into madness, or the out-of-left-field twists that make you question whether the filmmakers were ever serious in the first place. For a certain group of horror fans, Gothika serves as a go-to movie for when you're in the mood for something that's not quite scary, but still dark and atmospheric. It's the kind of film that works well when you're in a binge-watching mood, willing to forgive its flaws for the sake of some easy thrills. Its low-key but undeniable camp factor has earned it a loyal following, particularly among those who enjoy bad movies in the so bad it's good category. Some fans also find Gothika to be a misunderstood classic. Those fans argue that while it doesn't reinvent the wheel, it still holds an air of mystery and psychological intrigue that's worth revisiting. They point to the eerie atmosphere, the dramatic performances, and the surprising moments as evidence of the film's unique, albeit flawed, charm. For them, Gothika has become kind of a quirky cult phenomenon that's more enjoyable in hindsight, especially after the pressure of expectations has long faded. Gothika may not have revolutionized the psychological horror genre, but it has left a subtle mark in its own way. It serves as a decent introduction for newcomers, offers a bit of campy fun for fans, and has earned a niche spot in the cult horror landscape. While it's unlikely to be remembered as a genre-defining classic, it remains a film that resonates with those who appreciate its specific brand of atmospheric tension and supernatural intrigue. For better or worse, Gothika is a film that's stuck around, not as a shining example of psychological horror, but as an oddity that has found its place in the hearts of a select group of viewers who see something more in its flawed, fever dream narrative. After diving deep into the elements of Gothika, it's time to take a step back and evaluate the film as a whole. Like many films that promise psychological horror, but end up leaning heavily into supernatural tropes, Gothika offers a mixed bag of thrills and frustration. There's a lot to like about the atmosphere and the visual style, but these strengths are undercut by clunky storytelling and shallow character development. So let me give you my film's overall assessment and break down the strengths and weaknesses, and wrap it up with my personal rating and final recommendation. So Gothika has all the hallmarks of a psychological horror film, but it doesn't quite live up to its potential. It's a movie that tries to balance the complexity of the human mind with supernatural forces, but ends up stumbling with its narrative choices and lack of emotional depth. The film sets itself up with a fascinating premise. Dr. Miranda Gray, a psychiatrist accused of murder, begins to lose grip on reality as she uncovers supernatural forces at play. This setup holds a lot of promise, particularly in the psychological horror genre, where the line between what's real and what's imagined is often blurred. However, the execution leaves much to be desired. The film leans too heavily on its supernatural elements and fails to explore Miranda's psychological unraveling in a meaningful way. Instead of crafting a complex, engaging narrative, the film relies too much on jump scares, shallow character motivations, and a rushed plot that never allows the tension to build in a satisfying way. That said, Gothika does offer entertainment value. It's a film that's easy to watch and doesn't require too much thinking. Perfect for a casual movie night, where you're just looking for something dark and atmospheric without needing to invest too much emotionally. But for horror fans looking for a film with staying power, a deeper psychological impact, or a truly unsettling atmosphere, Gothika falls short. Let's break down what works and where it falls flat. One of Gothika's strongest elements is its atmosphere. Director Kassovitz does an excellent job of creating a sense of unease from the moment the film begins. The muted color palette, combined with the sterile setting of the penitentiary, creates a claustrophobic environment that mirrors Miranda's mental state. This visual style gives the film a haunting quality, even if the plot doesn't always live up to the visuals. The film excels in its use of shadows, reflections, and eerie imagery. While the plot may falter, these elements help to maintain a sense of dread throughout the film. Whether it's the unsettling reflections in the mirrors or the ghostly presence of the mysterious ghost girl, the visuals often enhance the psychological tension and still keep you on edge. Despite the script's flaws, Halle Berry brings her A-game to the role of Miranda Gray. She convincingly portrays a woman on the edge of her sanity, struggling to understand the events unfolding around her. Her performance adds weight to the film, gives it emotional depth, especially in the scenes where she tries to piece together what's happening to her. It's a strong performance, even if it's somewhat overshadowed by the lackluster script. On the other side, unfortunately, Gothika suffers from a predictably contrived plot. The twists and turns that should feel shocking instead come across as tired cliches. Instead of a gripping psychological exploration, the film quickly devolves into a formulaic supernatural thriller that doesn't leave much room for suspense or intrigue. By the time the big twists are revealed, the impact is diluted. The pacing in Gothika is one of the most frustrating aspects. At times, the film drags on with unnecessary scenes that don't add to the narrative, while at other moments, crucial plot points are rushed through without enough buildup. The narrative feels inconsistent, making it hard to fully get immersed in the story. Miranda's character arc, which should be the emotional core of the film, is disappointingly underdeveloped. Her descent into madness lacks nuance, and instead of exploring her psychological unraveling with depth, the film opts for quick, surface-level developments. Supporting characters, including Robert Downey Jr., exist mainly to provide exposition or serve as plot devices, rather than being fully realized individuals. This weakens the emotional stakes and makes it harder to connect with the characters. Given all of the above, my personal rating for Gothika is a 3 out of 10. While the film has its moments, particularly in terms of atmosphere and visual style, it ultimately fails to deliver a truly haunting or emotionally resonant experience. The film's reliance on cliches, predictable twists, and shallow characters makes it difficult to recommend for anyone looking for a genuinely thought-provoking or unsettling horror film. That being said, Gothika can still be a fun watch for a quote-unquote bad movie night, especially if you enjoy films that fall into that so bad it's good category. It's a film that's easy to enjoy for its campy qualities, but it doesn't offer much in terms of lasting impact or true psychological depth. So my recommendation, if you are a fan of psychological thrillers with a supernatural twist and you don't mind a few plot holes and contrived twists, Gothika might be worth a watch. It's an easy film to pop in if you're not looking for anything too complex or emotionally taxing. However, if you're someone who enjoys films that really dig deep into psychological horror or supernatural storytelling, there are far better films in the genre. For those seeking more intricate narratives, richer character development, and truly unsettling horror, I'd recommend looking elsewhere. Ultimately, Gothika is a movie that offers fleeting moments of entertainment, but doesn't leave a lasting impression. It's a film that's more about style than substance, and for those willing to overlook its flaws, it can still offer some dark, atmospheric fun. But for everyone else, it's likely to be an easy one to forget. And that wraps up this episode of Real Talk Horror Edition. Thank you so much for tuning in and diving deep with me into the world of Gothika. It's always a blast to dissect these films, especially when they have such a mix of potential and pitfalls. But before you go, I want to remind you of a few things to keep the horror conversation going. First off, don't forget to subscribe to Real Talk Horror Edition on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed today's discussion, or if you didn't and want to tell me why, leave a review. Your feedback not only helps me improve, but also helps other horror fans find the show. Plus, reviews are a great way to share your thoughts on the films we cover. Whether you agree with my take or you think I'm completely off base, I love hearing different perspectives. I also want to make sure that you're keeping up with everything happening behind the scenes. Follow me on social media, Instagram and Threads at RealTalk, or email therealtalk@gmail.com for updates on upcoming episodes, sneak peeks of future reviews, and a whole lot of other horror and film-related content. And I'm always happy to engage with listeners, so feel free to share your thoughts on Gothika or suggest any films you'd love to see covered in future episodes. Whether it's an overlooked gem or a classic that deserves more attention, your suggestions are always welcome. Speaking of future episodes, next time on Real Talk Horror Edition, we're diving into one of the most iconic silent horror films of all time, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This expressionist masterpiece is one of the pioneers of psychological horror, and I'm excited to explore the ways it's shaped the genre. Whether you've seen it before or it's your first time, this is going to be a fascinating discussion you won't want to miss. Until then, I want to remind you to keep it real and a little creepy. Stay spooky, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time for more thrilling discussions here on Real Talk Horror Edition. Stay safe, and as always, keep watching the shadows.
Creeping through the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape. Shadows play a twisted game. Fear and terror stake their claim. Footsteps follow close behind. Haunting thoughts invade your mind. Run away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay. Windows rattle, doors they creak. Ghostly whispers start to speak. Every corner hides a fear. Close your eyes, they're drawing near. Candles flicker, spirits call. In the night they'll take it all. Midnight strikes, the clocks rewind. Nightmares now are intertwined. Run away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay.